Okay. First of all, may I welcome all of you to the Birmingham Trade Union Council's May Day event, held on video link, Zoom, necessitated by the current COVID crisis, which is beyond anyone's control. But nevertheless, I thank you all for making a gallant effort to keep in touch with us from your homes, and wish all of you a very good 1 hour's conference. We will commence with music by Trish Jones and Stephen Boughton for quite a few minutes, and then we'll have, secondly, an interview with Gail, a midwife who complained about the harassment and bullying she received while she worked at the NHS. Thirdly, we'll have Keep Our National Health Public, which will be Patrick Hyton. Fourthly, we'll have Richard Hatcher from Birmingham Against the Cuts.
Of course.
Okay? Of course. And then there may be one or two other contributions, very small ones, after which then we'll have questions and answers. But as Naim did point out to you, if anyone wants to raise a question, please use the chat line, so I'll take the questions in order as they arise. That way I'll be fair with everyone. Okay? And hopefully...
Graham Fletcher, just this is the first and last time I'll speak. If you could encourage people to be brief, as we've already got our.
Yeah. Okay.
That's my last contribution.
Okay.
To prove I'm being brief.
Okay. All right. Thank you for that. Okay. But if you do raise questions or contributions, please be brief, succinct, to the point. Okay. We will now commence with the music from Trish Jones and Stephen Boughton.
I don't know where we get all these people to play for free for. It might be the kind of bribery and corruption we used to get them here, but there's some fantastic performance on tonight. But this is, I'm going to finish with a couple of tunes that you know actually. And this is one for Boris Johnson, or Bozo as we like to call him. And that sounds in tune. Yeah. This is one, I always like to introduce this to do with his fetish about buses. He makes model buses, apparently. And, you know, I've got nothing against buses. In fact, there's quite a few of us would like to see him under one. And this is a song with a subject that he knows little or nothing about. It's called Working People. And it's an audience participation song. And the free radicals, although there is only two of them, I know it's an old joke, but I keep repeating it on the vague hope that somebody might laugh, you know. The two free radicals have worked up this audience participation piece. So we're expecting you, because you are the audience, we believe at the moment anyway, to participate. So, Rick, the Rickster, you know, our harmonica player, what do we call him? I can't remember now. We call him Rick usually, anyway.
Or you.
Or you, yeah. And Trish Jones are going to show you how to participate in this song. So please participate away. If only I can remember the words. West End in apartments and lunch at the club, golfing engagements and weekends in France, royal enclosures at Ascot and Derby, foreign investments and lunch with a bank. But who builds the homes? Who builds the houses? Puts food on the table, moves earth for the road. Who fits the pipes for the gas and the water? Working people do. Working people do. Offshore accounts for investments and taxes, riding show entrance for Tristan and Luce, places at Oxford are ready and waiting, wine for the table and spoons for the soup. But who fights the wars, makes life for the city, drives all the trains and makes all the cars, lays all the bricks, who cares for the dying? Working people do. Working people do. And riding on ponies and private tuition, soul garden parties and things by the Thames. Follow the hounds, they're on a mission. Winter on skis and summer in Cannes. And who makes the goods? They climb for the city, drives all the trains and makes all the cars, lays all the bricks, cares for the dying. Working people do. Working people do. Country and riding to hounds. Government spokesman is lunching in town. Shares in the city, who's been to Eton. Front bench positions are ready to take. But who takes the pain? Who takes the poverty? Stands in the rain when their money is cut. Who calls for change? Let's make sure they get it. Working people do. Working people do. Who takes the pain? Who takes the poverty? Stands in the rain when their money is cut. Who calls for change? Let's make sure they get it. Working people. Working people. Working people do. So vote Labour. Well, they do say that Boris Johnson is a modern version of Margaret Thatcher. I don't quite see it really, but...
got the same hairdo.
I hadn't thought of that, that's quite good actually. Yeah, he has got the same hairdo. There we go. Margaret Thatcher is... I was going to say Margaret Thatcher is a modern version of Boris Johnson, but it's the other way around, isn't it? But this is a song what I wrote for Margaret Thatcher, for the glad passing really of Margaret Thatcher. I thought it was terrible, you know, the news that was the way the news was when Margaret Thatcher died, because I mean we always know that they're pretty biased, but when Margaret Thatcher died, it was ridiculous, absolutely ridiculous. The kind of there was one news item, I think, in the whole country that in any way echoed how millions and millions of people felt, and you know, the fact that the miners were burning effigies of Margaret Thatcher and so on and so forth. So I thought, well, better write a song about that then. And this is called The Day That Maggie Died. And this also has a chorus, you know. We're almost, I don't know whether we are in tune, but who cares really. And this is The Day That Maggie Died. So please join in. It's very simple, it's the end of each verse, just The Day That Maggie Died. Candles were lit, eulogies passages bit. Archbishops and grandees were keen to commit. It was in every paper the day that Maggie died. Under the ground there's still fields of coal. Millions get used to a life on the dole. Came promising unity, but came to divide. There ain't no excuses for lighting the bonfires to burn. Made a bit, speeches are writ, the leaders of parties all told a lie. Police leave was cancelled the day that Maggie died. And they're closing the roads and they're blocking the streets, and the rich and the powerful are filling church seats. All of the papers are pending their lives the day that Maggie died. Much of the land, factories stay shut, lives that are broken in bad health and short. And some couldn't care less, some laughed out loud. Don't need no excuses, lighting the bonfires to burn. They're bending the knee and they're crossing themselves. They pray for forgiveness, but she gave us hell amongst working people. I did see her smile the day that Maggie died. Most of the people still living in pain. We just got drunk and we danced in the rain. Most are indifferent or feeling the rage. Don't need no excuses, but lighting the bonfires to burn. So candles were lit, eulogies writ, the great and the good were saying their bit. It was on every channel the day that Maggie died. But most of the people still living in pain. We just got drunk and we danced in the rain. Most are indifferent or feeling the rage. Don't need no excuses for lighting the bonfires to burn. Most of the people still living in pain. We just got drunk and we danced in the rain. Most are indifferent or feeling the rage. Don't need no excuses for lighting the bonfires to burn. Don't need no excuses for lighting the bonfires to burn. Don't need no excuses for lighting the bonfires to burn. It's a radical. And Martin. I think we should have a break the day after we won the election. So we're not planning anyway to have a Red Labour folk club on the 13th because we'll all be too drunk. So.
Hello, everyone. My name is Elsie Gale. I am a practicing nurse and midwife, and I'm going to be talking a little bit about my role in NHS culture change and why this is. So my own experience has informed my role in this area of working, because when I returned from working abroad in about 2001, I experienced a drastic change in the NHS culture, which seemed to go against my professional role as a midwife particularly. And it concerned me that I was not able to raise concerns and have them resolved. So I actually began a journey, firstly being a trade union representative of the people in my workplace, observing what went on, and then learning a little bit about what, how it impacted people. The thing that really concerned me, though, was the fact that it had an impact on the lives of people that we were supposed to be caring for and actually doing no harm. So first of all, I just want to talk about what happened to me. I actually suffered, for no apparent reason, an episode of bullying, which caused me to turn into myself in a way that I had never done previously. But also it made me suicidal, which, people who know me would not believe that that would ever be a point of reference for myself. That actually concerned me a lot, because I couldn't actually manage to engage the managers to reconcile this incident of bullying. And it caused me a lot of harm. In fact, I would say I have some permanent damage from the bullying I received. Thankfully, the person who bullied me and we managed to resolve the issue between ourselves, and we now enjoy a professional relationship. So that bit of it actually was put down. What I did come to realize, though, that the issues around the culture in the NHS while we were caring for patients was not good. It was deeply ingrained, and in many ways it was very complex. So I then undertook a journey into looking at why these things happened. Were they happening right across the board in the health service? Was it happening anywhere else in other organizations? And what were the factors that caused them to happen? So it took me then into joining a number of groups. For example, Freedom to Care, which was set up by a professor at Surrey University. That was my first experience of a group of people who were clinicians who came together to look at the effects on clinicians initially, and then on patients. What was the outcome of patients? What they were talking about was the immediate harm, but also the long-term harm, which I was then able to apply to my own work as a midwife, in terms of the immediate harm to mothers and babies, and then the long-term harm, which would possibly come later on. One of the things that actually came out of that was the ability to raise concerns, but also then to be sanctioned for raising concerns, and then the suppression of voices that needed to speak about what was going on so that things could change. We now call that whistleblowing. I personally would like to call it raising concerns, because that is what my profession requires me to do: raise concerns and then take it to a level where it could actually be resolved. I think, so coming forward now into where we are with this COVID-19 crisis, what we're seeing is the inability of people to actually raise concerns.
Really?
In terms of the personal protection that they need to deliver care safely. But also what is showing is the inequalities in how issues impact communities who are not heard, whether it is that the person comes from a racial group, which is what we're seeing with BME people who are dying at they are impacted by COVID at a disproportionate rate, or indeed clinicians who are working at the front line to deliver care and are unable to. They're impacted by the fact that they cannot raise concerns safely. So this journey of mine actually took me into looking very carefully. I was very fortunate to have a piece of project work to do, which was trying to bring best care to a very deprived area of my locality. And it was a research post initially. So it actually allowed me to look into all aspects of the health service. I was able to look at situations of the mental health sector. I was involved in maternity fora, which allowed me to look at each little section of the structures around the maternity services, including commissioning, regulation. I was able to look at the Department of Health, how that actually was structured and how it worked. And then I decided to look outside of the NHS into other organizations. So organizations allied to the NHS, but also organizations in social care, to see how it is, what was happening, and then were there any best practices that were ongoing in terms of changing the culture. Around that time, I actually met the work of Professor Michael West. He was part of a group of people doing the NHS survey at Aston University. And what was really interesting for me was that at that time, I was a trade union rep working with HR, looking very carefully at the culture inside the trust in which I was working. So being able to look at the actual sentences that were put by people on their survey paperwork, I was able to see, people were ticking the boxes, but then they were able to make comments that I found those things really significant. But what I did find was a challenge in terms of changing the culture based on the statements that were made. At that time, it became very clear to me that there was an issue about people who were of other ethnicities apart from white European. There was really a problem for people of African descent who appeared to be having a worse time, but their voices were absent. So that was one thing that I thought was important, particularly because myself, I have that. I identify as a person of African descent. So then looking towards solutions, because to be honest, that was the only reason I was undertaking this journey. It was about making things better for myself in terms of how I worked with the women and the families that I was contracted to do, but also to help my colleagues, some of whom were having a lot of issues around, raising concerns and actually having them addressed, but also improving their work-life balance. Because if people can have a good work-life balance, then when they come to work, they give up their role and the patient agenda is then satisfied. So patients actually benefit from how staff are treated. And this is what Michael West was talking about, how staff are treated impacts how patients, the patient outcome. I then started working with a patient safety group led by Dr. Kim Holt, called Patients First. It consisted of a number of doctors, nurses. I think I was the only midwife in the group, who had come together. They'd tried to raise concerns, but they decided to come together to make a concerted effort towards changing the agenda in terms of the culture in the NHS. I was able to work with regulators, well, certainly my regulator, in terms of some of the issues that we found. So raising the concern with them and working with them to try and address some of those problems systemically, from their perspective. I was also involved in a bullying support group called Dawn, which was set up primarily by teachers, and they were able to support people locally, but also have a number of conferences which drew on the expertise of people like Professor Michael West and others who had made some way into looking at the issues from an academic point of view as well. We eventually, Tim Field, Dr. Tim Field, who was well renowned in the world of bullying, we set up a group to have an annual lecture, which was held at Aston University in memory of Professor Tim Field. We had a number of people who came to the lectures. We grew a bit of a network. And then, you know, as organizations, you know, they form and then they grow and then they sort of fade out once the need is completed. So looking then towards the solutions that I'm working with now, I am part of a group of midwives, and what we're seeking to do is to embed best practice into maternity care. Very difficult in terms of engaging the NHS, because the NHS is enormous, but Better Births, which is the extant maternity policy, is actually talking about continuity of carer. And for us, certainly that is really important. And it is recognized right across the maternity spectrum as being one of the best ways, or the best ways, of engaging people. So giving continuity of carer allows the clinician to develop a trusting relationship with the client. And out of that, the relationship is beneficial to both, if it works well. The NHS has also, along with Roger Klein, embedded the Workplace Race Equality Scheme. This is of benefit to everyone, in particular those people who have protected characteristics. So, for example, people of the Black and ethnic minority groups, whereby it is the RES is actually something that's done every year alongside the NHS reporting, and it demonstrates what is going on in the organization. So the organization knows what is happening, and then they have the ability to actually improve the situation for these protected groups. The NHS has also set up a scheme called the Whistleblowing Support Scheme. I was part of that pilot, and the pilot is now complete, but the scheme, I understand, is ongoing. And what it seeks to do is to identify people who are genuine whistleblowers and help them to get back into work. So it recognizes that there is a problem and then seeks to improve the working lives, or make some recognition that there is a problem in terms of whistleblowing. People are raising concerns, but there is something that's stopping them from getting them resolved, and then they are attacked. So there is some recognition and some effort put into helping people who need to and who do raise concerns. The regulatory groups, I'm happy to say, seem to have taken an interest in working well. So the Nursing and Midwifery Council, they're actually moving towards making improvements in terms of helping to achieve patient safety outcomes. And then the trade unions, I know, have got on board, because I've been involved with the Royal College of Midwives, and I've observed some of the work that they're doing in terms of getting best practice in employment, best practice in recruitment and retention, and supporting people who actually raise concerns in the workplace. So the work continues. I guess it's going to be for some time to come. I'm continuing in my own personal journey to try to make a difference to the lives of mothers and babies. Very happy to take any questions that anyone might have. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, everybody. I think that's the end of the...
People are going to be isolated right now. feeling really alone. We'd be talking about £1.2 billion worth of loss.
It's mainly about people coming together at a time like this.
We don't like having planning.
Okay, Ian.
Can you hear me?
We can start now.
Okay. Our next contributor will be Patrick Hyton from Keep Our National Health Public, Birmingham. Patrick?
Yeah, thanks, Ian. Can you hear me? Can you hear me okay, everybody? Enjoying your lockdown? Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think obviously there's a few interesting points there raised, and it's a shame that the woman who was on the video couldn't be in the discussion group to have a little bit more of a chat about those. I mean, particularly things like whistleblowing, raising concerns. We've seen some examples of concern being raised by staff. In fact, I think from what I saw on social media yesterday, there was actually a demonstration on Westminster Bridge by a bunch of nurses outside St Thomas's Hospital, saying that they weren't prepared to put up with any more of this business about not having the right PPE. So, I mean, we could have had quite a bit of a discussion about some of those issues, also about continuity of care, which I'll probably touch on in a minute. What I really wanted to say today was just a few things that John Caffrey and I had been talking about during this kind of lockdown period, and we haven't been obviously having any Keep Our NHS public meetings in terms of the NHS in the current situation and what we might be able to do and beyond the crisis sort of thing. So, I mean, obviously, just to kind of state the bleeding obvious, really, that the COVID-19 crisis had had an unprecedented impact on the NHS, both in terms of capacity and organisation. And we've effectively just really seen in the NHS a bunch of exhausted staff, underprotected in terms of the level of protective equipment. And their efforts really have been truly heroic. And I think a number of people in the population think the same thing. I mean, and they're united in their core effort to protect the public and minimise the number of deaths from this virus. I think we ought to be moving to a situation, and we see it through this kind of Thursday evening clapping, whatever you think about that, is that we shouldn't forget this heroism. And in the same way in which we kind of honour soldiers, if you like, after, you know, before and during and after wartime, we ought to have something like this. And I think again there was an element of that in International Workers' Day, which I know the government kind of capitalised on and probably didn't really mention the trade unions and all that. So I think I'm just really trying to kind of bring out what's emerging at the moment. There is a kind of culture, I think, that values what working class people are doing, what workers are doing, and what workers are doing in the National Health Service. Whether or not, you know, the things I'm going to say, we're going to be able to achieve that just on this kind of sentiment in the country is another kind of kettle of fish, though, really. But again, I think one of the interesting things is that although clearly there's going to need to be an inquiry into the initial failings and preparedness of the NHS and particularly at government level, at a political and a managerial level, there's got to be an inquiry into that. There has, I think we've got to say, been a level of organisation and serious national effort to pull the NHS together as a truly national health service eventually, when they actually got the idea of what they needed to be doing. And I mean, within that, you know, which is quite kind of heartwarming, really, there was some level of nationalisation, if you like, although it as a cost of the taxpayer, of some of the private hospitals and their bed capacity. Okay, we paid them, but my understanding is that they didn't make a profit out of it. So I think, you know, that kind of illustrates what can be done governmentally if the political will exists. So this is kind of, John and I have talked about this. John's the secretary of the Keep Our NHS Public Birmingham, and we think that some of these messages ought to be going out now during the crisis and after the COVID crisis, if it ever does finish. that some of these Keep Our NHS public groups and other activist groups like Birmingham Against the Cuts and local trades councils particularly, and the unions via the TUC, because I think it's really important that, you know, the Tory government recognised a role for the trade unions in this and brought to some extent the trades union congress and the unions on board. So I think it'd be useful if we could work through the unions on this. I mean, and maybe through the opposition. I'm not really clear. I mean, I'm not going to sort of give my views on the opposition. I'm not really clear where the opposition is at the moment, how strong it is. Clearly, we've had a disastrous election in terms of the opposition political party. But I think we ought to be asking for 5 things. And these are things really that we've been campaigning for before, you know, we had this awful Tory government elected. The first thing is renationalising all the private NHS contracts that were let by these clinical commissioning groups to the private sector, and bring these back in-house when these contracts expire. I mean, for example, whole swathes of community care and community services have gone to Virgin Care, Care UK and firms like this. And it's obscene that some of these, you know, these firms, some of who do not pay tax, we know clearly about Virgin Care. They don't pay tax in this country due to complex financial and tax arrangements that they have. And that they should be allowed to continue making a profit out of vulnerable people's needs and patients' needs when the public funding is going to be exhausted after this crisis, social and economic lockdown. So, you know, that is the first point, really. We need to press on this nationalisation element that's been happening at the top, you know, even though it's temporary at the moment, we need to be capitalising on that. Secondly, I think we need to be taking public health, you know, the public health function back into the NHS and or funding the local authorities properly for this service. You know, it was moved in 2012-13 into the local authorities as a result of the act that was going on then. But I mean, you know, it's now been at the centre of this crisis in terms of testing for coronaviruses, and it's been found wanting because for a lack of funding and preparedness, mainly because of 10 years of Tory austerity on the local authorities who've been deprived of central funding and it's left, you know, the service hollowed out. So this can't be allowed to continue if we're prepared for future pandemics and public health crises, or even just for day-to-day manning of public health functions. You know, it needs to be either taken back, you know, protected under the NHS, because the NHS does have some relative protective funding, or funded properly in the local authorities. Thirdly, I think we need to be asking for, you know, demanding, if you want to use that word, to take back in-house all the outsourced so-called back office functions, such as laboratories, imaging, catering, payroll, etc. Because outsourcing in the last 10 years has left the country with a disjointed and fragmented health service, run partly by private firms who take profits and surpluses out of our NHS and feed them back to shareholders. There's no evidence that that type of outsourcing is any more efficient or effective than in-house provision, and it's usually an opportunity to reduce the terms and conditions of formerly public sector workers. And these are now recognised increasingly by the public as key workers who the nation now recognises as more important than the bankers, the money men, and the financial jugglers who have no value to the day-to-day workings of the economy. So, you know, I think we need, you know, that's the thing we need to be pushing for. Again, the optimism is not particularly there. I mean, there's an example already, which I heard the other day on another phone-in, where the Nightingale hospitals have already been told by the government they've got to outsource their cleaning function to a firm, I think it's called OCS. Again, another glimmer on the horizon is that these people at OCS who were doing some work for the Ministry of Justice have been on strike. So, you know, there's some good points and bad points going on. So these bloody Tories are still trying to do things they were trying to do before under the guise of, you know, the COVID crisis. So, you know, it ain't going to be easy. Longer term and a bit more radically and probably even more difficult, we need to be thinking about how we properly integrate social care into the NHS, particularly adult social care, and even taking this service back into public ownership. That would be a long-term goal. I mean, the public is becoming more aware of the relevance of social care to the NHS, and indeed to society in general. It's clear from the crisis that particularly elderly care in the is a sector which was at significant risk. It's not been protected properly. And again, partly this is a result of the myriad of care providers which exist in the country who try to make a profit from what is an increasingly underfunded sector. I mean, many of the private equity firms have a stake in these homes, and many of them are teetering on the verge of bankruptcy. Now, there has been a half-hearted attempt, which I won't go into the detail of, to what they call integrating social care, but it's not really worked. And what we need is really a true examination of what practically and realistically could be done, you know, to bring social care back into the public sector. I mean, the National Pensioners Convention and locally the West Midlands Pensioners Convention is calling for a national care service. And I know that Rick Hatcher will probably say a little bit more about social care later on in terms of into the detail. And finally, I think what we really need to do is more radically abolish all private healthcare private healthcare in the NHS, and which you know exists in the NHS, and also eventually all the hospitals and health services owned by profit-making private companies in this country. I mean, again, during what I said earlier on, that during the COVID crisis, there was some need to increase the bed capacity. So effectively, they nationalised it as effectively what they called an at-cost basis. You know, they said there was no profit being made from it, and you know, it's difficult to know how that's true, but it was done on the basis of if this is what it costs you, this is what we'll pay. So again, the opportunity's there, you know, and I mean, again, if you look at these private firms, they operate on the basis of private insurance schemes, which will cover, you know, their costs, you know, and keep them afloat. But in effect, that's not happening for them. They're so profit hungry, and they're so much over capacity. They sell the services to the NHS, so clearly they can't exist on the insurance system alone. You know, so you know, we ought to be looking at the economics of this, so that we can take this capacity back into the NHS and have a truly national health service. So just finally, just as a kind of background thing, much of what I've been talking about has been around for the last sort of, well, 5-10 years almost, under this proposed NHS reinstatement bill, which a number of health activists have been kind of campaigning around. But to be perfectly frank with you, it's gained very little traction with politicians. And with a big Tory majority that we've just had, you know, the set of demands would need to be one that commanded wide support. And what I'm really saying to you is I think there's an element of that in the populace. I mean, the other negative side of what's happening in the populace generally is that we are all doing what we're told to do, you know, so there's not exactly a kind of revolutionary kind of radical culture in there, even though there's a kind of, you know, a thing in the air about sort of valuing workers and valuing the working class. So again, it could go either way, I think, you know. I think the other thing that John said, John Caffrey, who's the secretary of the group who's here in the conversation today, said that we need to guard against this idea of radically changing the NHS and reorganising it. And, you know, and again, all the people who are in there at the moment working on the COVID crisis are going to be so exhausted at the end of it, they might not be up for the idea of, you know, changing the whole bloody system again. So, I mean, again, we need to think as campaigners about how we can ask for these changes to be made, really. And then very, very finally, I think what we also need to think about, either before and during we start pushing for some of these changes, is this trade deal that's before Parliament at the moment. It's not being dealt with by Parliament at the moment. So I think it's important that people start using the opportunities to write to their MP. And we're going to send out a letter to all our supporters, if you're on our mailing list, and to say, look, there's a letter here that's already written for you, to write to the MPs to get the NHS taken out of that trade deal with the European, with the USA, because again, it's the fact that if there are still private contracts in the NHS, US companies are going to want to bid for them, you know. And that is a real danger to our NHS. So in a way, the fight's against privatisation generally, actually, and that's actually quite difficult at the moment because we do have a lot of private contracts in the NHS, not in the mainstream, but on the periphery. So, you know, I think the messages are, you know, let's have a look at those kind of 5 demands and see how we can work, particularly through the TUC, who seem to have some sort of, you know, relationship with the government at the moment. And let's write to our MPs, you know, whether they be Tory or Labour, to try and get the NHS taken out of this trade bill. Because again, Johnson and his lying friends during their leadership election said that they would do that. Let's hold them to that he promised. Is that okay? Is that enough? And you know, I may have gone on a little bit long, but yeah. And I can hang around and take questions later, and I'll let Rick do his thing.
Questions will come later.
Care. Is that all right?
That's perfect. Yeah. Questions will come later.
Okay.
Thank you, Patrick, for the excellent contribution. We now turn to Richard Hatcher from Birmingham again.
Oh, right.
Richard, can you unmute yourself? Bottom left-hand corner.
Richard, have you unmuted yourself?
Richard?
Ah, there we are. Are we okay?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Good. Okay. Thanks very much for inviting me. And I very much agree with what Patrick was saying. And so mine follows on very well from that, I think. I'm going to talk about adult social care. I'm not going to talk about children's social care because that raises rather different issues. We've all got experience of doctor's surgeries and hospitals, so we know about the NHS, at least from personal experience. In contrast, most of us have very little experience of adult social care. And I think it's taken the pandemic to really make people much more aware of the social care system, the number of deaths, the shortage of PPE, the risk to dedicated staff, and so on. Birmingham Live, you know, the Birmingham Mail, a couple of days ago reported that Jack Dromey, the MP for Erdington, said he'd surveyed the 47 care homes in his constituency and found, quote, deeply worrying staffing levels, inadequate provision of PPE, and limited access to testing for care home staff. That's the picture there. And we could talk a lot about that, but I'm not going to, because what I want to also for us to be thinking about is the future of social care. And that campaign for a different future for social care starts now. And I want to start by giving some facts about social care, because I think they're not, they need to be more widely known. So forgive me, those of you who've got more expertise in social care than I have, but here they are. First of all, I think there are 4 forms of adult social care provided by the state. One of them is residential care homes, and there are 15,500 residential care homes in England, with an estimated about 500,000 beds. We often just go past them in the street, don't we, and don't really notice. But that compares that 15,500 with about 200 hospital trusts. And of course, most of these care homes are privately run. The second form of adult social care is domiciliary care, care in people's homes. And it's estimated that each week in the UK, over 500,000 people receive social care support in their home. It works out at about 1 million visits every single day. What happens in those visits can range from helping people to use the toilet, to preparing a meal, to support with medication. And care workers visiting can at times see anything up to 20 clients a day. The third form of social care is individual personal supporter system. And there are around 70,000 disabled people in England who themselves employ, but are paid by the state, employ personal assistants to help them live the sort of lives that we take for granted. They're employing about 145,000 personal assistants. And then in addition to that, there are day centres and various other forms of funded community support. Who pays for this? Well, unlike the NHS, funding for social care is provided through local councils. And also, unlike the NHS, it's not free. It's not free for all. Some services are provided free, but most are means tested. And the threshold for England is £23,250. And so if you've got assets above that, then you will only get limited or no support from your local authority. Now, let me say something about the workers in social care. There are nearly 500,000 care workers working in care and nursing homes, and there are about 600,000 providing care in people's homes, and then there's another 150,000 working in community and day care. So this is a huge workforce. In fact, it's well over 1 million. It's about 4 times as many people working in social care as there are nurses in the NHS. And I want to just say something about Birmingham, because adult social care is actually one of the largest sectors of the Birmingham economy. There are about 500,000 workers in Birmingham. 29,000 of them work in adult social care, which is not that far short, actually, from the number of people working in manufacturing. We hear a lot about manufacturing. We don't hear much about workers in social care. And of those 29,000 workers, over 3/4 are employed in the private sector. Only about 7% work for the local authority. And of course, the vast majority of that workforce is women, about 80%, and about half are white, about half are black and BAME, and there are many EU and non-EU workers working in social care in Birmingham. What also struck me is that only half of those jobs are full-time, and in fact, 1/4 of workers working in social care are employed on 0 hours contract.
Okay.
So, yeah, something about pay. Well, there's been a report that came out recently on this. About half of frontline care workers pay less than the real living wage. And actually tens of thousands are paid illegally below the actual legal minimum wage. So it's a shocking picture. In the council's budget in Birmingham, social care is by far the largest area of spending, about £330 million, which is about 40% of the total budget. And the majority of that goes straight out to private providers, running care homes and providing support in people's homes. And you can see a list of them on the council website. In total, the council has 705 contracts, 705 with providers of social care. 434 of those are care homes, and the rest are various sorts of supported living contracts. But there is no information on the council website, apart from a very few exceptions, of who owns these providers, who the providers are, and not just who the providers are, but who owns the owners of the providers. And it ties in with what Patrick was saying about national and in many cases international companies, private equity companies that have moved into this market. So we need a national campaign on social care. In health, we've got KONP and health services, health campaigns together. We need a parallel national campaign for social care, and we must take the opportunity of this pandemic to begin to build that on the support of people who've realised what a serious situation we're in. And that campaign, that national campaign, is already underway because for the last year, national planning meetings for reclaim social care have been actually taking place in Birmingham, and Patrick and I have been going along to them. And the Reclaim Social Care campaign, which just have a look on the website, has published the following manifesto. So this is what we stand for: a universal service available to all on the basis of need and free at the point of use to all who need it.
Yeah.
Funded through progressive taxation, publicly provided, subject to national standards, locally provided, locally accountable, and designed as far as possible by service users. That's really important.
Yeah.
Addressing people's aims, aspirations, and choices, not just bare needs, providing staff with training, qualifications, career structure, decent pay, and giving informal carers, and that means all those people, family members in most cases, who are provided support in the home without pay, giving them support and respite care where possible. And all of that means, and here I echo what Patrick was saying, getting the market out of adult social care. And because social care is funded through local councils, they can decide who to fund as providers. Birmingham Council could stop funding for-profit providers as each contract runs out. Stop that and rebuild capacity in the not-for-profit sector. And that would ensure both higher standards for clients and staff, and it would save money because they wouldn't be paying for profits. How could that system be run? Well, it could be run by the council, but I don't think that's the best model. I think the best option is a multi-stakeholder cooperative model, a joint partnership between the council, care workers, adult social care users, and community organisations that are also involved in providing support. And that's the model that is being advocated by a whole number of, I'm not trying to show you, but of a number of organisations in the field. It's also actually the model that the government in Wales actually officially supports. And so I'm just coming to a conclusion, but there is an immediate first step that the council should take, and that is it needs to carry out an audit, an inquiry with the results made public of all the care providers that it is currently contracting, those 705 different contracts. What's the cost of each contract? Who is it going to? Who are these owners of providers? And who owns, as I say, the owners? What are the number of clients that are being supported by each of these providers? What's the ratio of staff to clients? What are the qualifications and pay of each grade of staff? What are the number of vacant jobs that are going? High level of vacancy in social care. And that's what Paulette Hamilton, who's the Cabinet Member for Health and Social Care, and Rob Pocock, who's the Chair of the Health and Social Care Scrutiny Committee in Birmingham, that's the inquiry that they should launch as soon as they can. Final point, and that is that we also don't want social care in the city just run by one cabinet member, which is the situation ridiculous. We want a participatory model of social care. And I think there are 3 reforms which the City Council could put into practice tomorrow if it had the political will, even under the Johnson government. At the moment, the first one is this. At the moment, the council holds monthly open meetings on adult social care, and that's quite a step forward because it doesn't do that in any other area of service. I've been going along to these meetings and they're well attended, but they're also heavily managed and controlled largely by officers. They need to be transformed, and so nobody ever from the of the speakers ever criticises either national policy or the policy of the council. These forums need to be transformed into a genuine democratic forum where people can raise their concerns and demands about the national situation and the local one. Second reform, the council should set up an advisory committee on adult social care with representatives of all the stakeholders, workers, users, and their unions, perhaps elected from that forum that I've just mentioned. And thirdly, we also need to open up the Health and Social Care Scrutiny Committee. Its constitution allows it to have representatives of workers and service users on it. Why doesn't it do so? It should open up that as well. And with those three reforms, that would give everybody involved in social care in the city a real voice in how it's provided. Okay, thanks very much.
Thank you, Richard, for the excellent contribution. Can we now move on to Tim Hollins, please?
Yep, hiya. Is that okay? Can you hear all right?
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, very quickly, please.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thanks very much for inviting me as Cuba Solidarity to address the meeting for May Day. I thought I'd just give a quick update of what Cuba is doing around COVID-19 because that's something that's not really been in the mainstream media by any means. Obviously, Cuba has a massive history of providing healthcare in other countries. It sent doctors to Chile and Algeria straight after the revolution of 1959. Coming to COVID, they've got more doctors per head of population in Cuba than any other country in the world. So they're brilliantly well placed to have the community doctors in every barrio going around to every house, making sure that everyone knows exactly what's going on, providing testing where it's needed, and making sure that there's isolation as soon as anybody tests positive. So far, they have had 1,537 cases of COVID, of the disease, and 64 deaths, which is in a population of 12 million. So where they've isolated barrios, one of the things they've done, obviously all the food and restaurant and bars are all closed, so they are providing food and drinks to everybody who is in lockdown in their barrios, and the service of that food is being taken round by all the workers who would normally be working in the bars and restaurants, and they're being paid by the state to do that. So they're on top of the pandemic in terms of what's actually going on in Cuba. But of course, they've sent doctors all around the world. They sent doctors to Italy very quickly. They've sent teams to Andorra, Jamaica, Venezuela, Angola, South Africa to support health services in those countries and help them to get on top of it. According to the US State Department, this is an abusive relationship that Cuba has with these partner countries. And they're only doing it in order to export Marxist-Leninism or something. You wouldn't believe the sort of stuff that the US still puts out. All of this, of course, under an ever tighter blockade of Cuba, just to reinforce the fact that the blockade of Cuba was instigated in 1961 after the failure of the Bay of Pigs invasion. It was the US government's attempt under JFK, under Kennedy, to strangle the Cuban Revolution, having failed to invade it. And so the Cubans have had nearly 60 years of the blockade. It's having an effect on their ability to treat COVID. They've had some respirators donated from Switzerland, which were blockaded and were not able to be delivered. The transport company refused to deliver them because they would have been fined by the US government. But a lot of supplies have come from China. China is strong enough to basically ignore the blockade and say to the US that they will trade with Cuba, whatever the US thinks.
Yeah.
Interestingly, there have been calls from even certainly centre commentators and from some right-wing commentators around the world saying, well, why on earth is the blockade of Cuba continuing when the US has good relations of a sort with North Korea and with all sorts of other countries? The blockade makes no sense. But it's fallen upon deaf ears, of course. And so under Trump, the blockade has got tighter than ever, and shortages are back in Cuba. But I think just to finish a sort of rundown of where they are, they have learned over the years to deal with hurricanes. They have about a big hurricane about every 3 or 4 years, and they know how to deal with them, and they don't devastate society. They know how to deal with epidemics. They were in the front line against the Ebola epidemic 3 or 4 years ago in West Africa. And they've dealt with the blockade for nearly 60 years. And so they are absolutely experienced and committed to defending the revolution and everything that it stands for. Just to finish, last year, Cuba Solidarity hosted one of the doctors from the Ebola Brigade, the Henry Reeve Medical Brigade. His name is Pichi Fonseca. He came to Birmingham, spoke at a brilliant public meeting that we organised, and had a big social. We've stayed in email contact with him, so we just asked him for a quick May Day greeting. So this is what he sent back, which arrived a couple of days ago. Warmest May Day greetings to you all from Cuba, where I am working in the front line against the pandemic. I am working for my people in the way that the great Cuban Revolution has taught me, giving my all, and I will give my own life if necessary in this war, a war which we are winning. And this despite the cruel and vicious US blockade against our tiny island of Cuba. But it fills me with immense pride that we are continuing to defend the universal values of life and health for all. I would like to send you a great big hug across the ocean, a huge embrace of solidarity to you all, especially those I had the privilege to meet last year on my tour. Once this hurricane of COVID-19 has passed over, do come and visit me here in Cuba. A warm socialist welcome awaits you all. A revolutionary greeting from the bottom of my heart to all of you. Pichi. That's it.
Thank you for his excellent contribution. We have one question from Mary. Mary?
Hi there, and thank you very much for this great meeting. And particularly, I'd like to thank Patrick and Rick for the clear summary of what we need to do. So my question is, given that we have unprecedented support now for the NHS, people clapping, people raising money, I think we need to maximise that support, because rapidly folk will forget when the immediate crisis is over. And we're against a vicious Tory government that is still committed to austerity, I'm sure, and to maintaining private profit. So my question really is, how can we coordinate nationally, maybe through Keep Our NHS Public, possibly on Patrick's 5 demands? Because I think we need to start working now, because people will forget just how terrible the crisis has been and how woefully, criminally mismanaged the NHS has been. So I would suggest it would be useful, and perhaps you can comment on this, to have national demands that we can put through trade union branches, through Labour Party grassroots, maybe with a petition, to build a head of support that makes it very, very difficult for the Labour Party nationally to ignore us and for the Tory government to ignore. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Now, my suggestion is we go on to Bob Whitehead, and at the end we'll have an opportunity for people to make their replies to any questions raised. Are you happy with that?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Can we now have Bob Whitehead, please?
Thank you. I'd like to start by giving 3 examples of when trade unions are taking the environmental issue and the climate very seriously. The first one is in New South Wales, in Sydney, in the early 1970s. There was a movement called the Green Bans movement. And it was led by the Builders Labourers Federation, the BLF. And at the request of and in support of residents groups, they took industrial action to stop developers turning Sydney into a concrete jungle and to preserve open and green spaces. They said, yes, we want to build, but only socially useful things like social housing, parks, culture centres and so on. And when the bosses said, no, we're not having that, they threatened and actually took wide-scale industrial action, which forced the hands of employers, and they won again and again and again. Overall, there were over 50 green bans implemented in the Sydney area by this trade union in the early 1970s, before they were victimised by the state and the leaders were dismissed. That's one example which we may not have heard of. The second one we certainly will have heard of, and that was the Lucas plan, much closer to home. When the shop stewards combine in the Lucas factories drew up an alternative plan for production a few years after the green bans movement in Australia, to produce, instead of armaments, socially useful products, kidney machines, green vehicles, and renewable energy production. There's a very detailed plan drawn up. It could easily have been done with the skills and technology that they had at the time. Of course, this was rejected by management, and in the end, they closed all the plants down. The third example is a current one. It began in 2018 in a place called Oshawa, which is close to Toronto in Canada. There's a very large and long-standing General Motors car factory there, and they've had threats and actual, not just threats, massive reductions in jobs and a threat and a promise of closure. So the union there declared they want the plant placed under public ownership, nationalised without compensation, and placed under democratic workers and community control.
Yeah.
Then the plant could then produce electric vehicles for the public sector, beginning with Canada Post. And this struggle is still ongoing. They're not accepting redundancy. They want the plant converted into a socially useful plant with the current machinery, with public control of what's going on. If that was done, it would cause a decrease of 400,000 metric tons of carbon dioxide per year. And a total of 13,000 good union jobs will be created in the process. So they're just three examples of when unions have taken the environmental and climate issue very seriously. What I'm trying to say here is we need more of this, a lot more of this. I say that because I know that at the moment COVID's at the front of our minds, but what's coming down the line after that, the climate crisis, I'm afraid, is far, far more serious than this dreadful situation we're in already. We're already seeing regular extreme weather events, massive ice melting, sea level rise, sea temperature rise, and sea acidity rise. Unless this is stopped and reversed fairly quickly, the sixth mass extinction of animal life that we're living through will grow, and it could include us. So the bad news is the average temperature rises have been more than 1 degree now since pre-industrial times. Carbon dioxide emissions are now well over 400 parts per million, the highest level in 800,000 years. And this is increasing. It's not flatlining, the curve is not straightening out, it's increasing steadily all the time. Now, we've had 25 COPs, Conferences of the International Parties, COPs. Apart from the partial success in Paris in 2015, which put a limit of 2 degrees, or better 1.5 degrees on the amount of global warming allowable, they've all been talking shops and not much has happened. The amount of CO2 is increasing, temperatures are increasing, and the effects will soon become irreversible. Most scientists think we have 10 years to stop it getting out of control, after which time nothing can be done. And it'll make COVID, I'm afraid, look like a tea party. So I think it's very important that as the leaders and the COP people are not taking this seriously, and are not going to, in my view, the trade unions must step forward and impose their view on these things and make sure it is taken seriously. A new kind of economy is needed. decreased fossil fuel use replaced by renewable, but also degrowth in useless products. Less planes, less cars, less armaments, less plastic, less useless consumer goods, more education, health, social care, housing, renewable energy, public transport, culture, sport, and free time. A completely new economy is needed to try and stop all of this. We don't want just a greened up capitalism which makes ever more goods, but this time in a slightly greener way. No, thank you. Now, the good news is that after years and years and years of campaigners going on about this, the ideas have now become more in the mainstream. Largely, I would say, thanks to the Youth Strike for the Climate mobilizations across the earth. They've been international. Also thanks to Extinction Rebellion and others who, by their direct action, have put this issue now much more into the mainstream. And we have to build on all of that. Now, you wouldn't know that things were serious if you followed what Her Majesty's government are doing. £27 billion for road building and improvement from Rishi Sunak. HS2, Heathrow 3, Hinkley C. All these things could not be much more ungreen if you tried, and yet they're ploughing ahead with all of these things. All the verbal talk about we're going to cut carbon emissions, we're a world leader, rubbish, absolute rubbish. They're ploughing ahead with business as usual, and we know what the result will be. Now, accidentally, and for entirely the wrong reasons, COVID, we've had a glimpse of what the future could actually be like. Empty skies, empty streets, safer to cycle, safer to walk, and the buses can run on time. And if they were allowed out, children could actually play in the streets. Now, we didn't want it this way, but it just shows what things could be like. So it's important we do not return to business as usual once this is all over, because business as usual got us into this mess in the first place. So we have to demand radical changes, and that must come from the trade unions as well as everybody else. That's particularly important now because of the lockdown, the street protests, of course, are banned, XR and the Youth Strike for the Climate. So the trade unions must really step forward. And I have to ask a few questions. Why are some trade unions supporting Heathrow 3, HS2, which is extremely ungreen, and Hinkley C? Why did some HS2 workers spit in the faces of HS2 protesters not far from here a month or two ago? A complete divorce between what the trade unions need and what's actually happening. There's a job of work to be done there, in my view. An end to road building. Instead, we have free public transport in the conurbations. We have cheap, publicly owned intercity rail and coaches. Why aren't we targeting the frequent flyers and the need for air passenger duty and for aviation fuel tax?
Yeah.
If I just finish.
I'll just,
can we have one speaker, please?
Oh, yeah. All right.
Can we have one speaker, please?
No, they won't.
No, the background noise here. Bob, can you
just finish with what's happening in Birmingham?
Very well.
At the instigation of Extinction Rebellion and others, Birmingham City Council declared a climate emergency on the 11th of June last year. It set up a task force called R20, Route to Zero, and its brief is to draw up a plan to make Birmingham carbon neutral by 2030. And this plan has been drawn up in liaison with various campaigning groups who were invited onto the task force. It's going to be put to the council, the full report, in June. That's now been delayed because of the virus, but presumably July, September, who knows. But, and it's a very big but, the council has employed some consultants to estimate how we can get there and to what degree we can actually get there within 10 years. They're called antithesis. And they said the best it can be achieved is a 72% reduction by then. And in terms of transport, only a 30% reduction from the very dirty and polluted air that we have at the moment, caused by congestion, overuse of the car, etc. And to me, that's not good enough. That's not good enough. So we need far more radical proposals to go to this task force to be adopted by the full council. So we don't just get some mild tinkering. Important, no, it is important, but not just some mild reforms. We want a root and branch change for the economy in the interest of working people and in the interest of the environment. For example, mass house insulation would create thousands of jobs, well-paid jobs, skillful jobs, and it could soak up a lot of the unemployment and cause a massive reduction in the amount of CO2 produced in Birmingham. For example, a free public transport system that now exists in many, many places around the world will have a huge effect on getting the cars off the road. There are things that could be done, but at the moment, it's looking like we're going to get an improvement, but not a good enough improvement. So I'm encouraging trade unions to take notice of what the council is doing, get involved in the task force, and ask for things which will benefit trade unionists, workers, and the environment. Thank you.
Thanking Bob for his excellent contribution. Now, we now have a short statement from Catherine Gaffney, and then you'll have the opportunity to raise questions and answers. And I have a list here of people who have so far indicated. Catherine, your statement, please. Catherine, can you unmute yourself, please?
Yeah, I had done that before, but it went again. Right, I just want to say, first of all, that thank you very much to the Trades Council, Birmingham Trades Council. Without them, there would have been no Birmingham Workers' Memorial Day event, which I think was very successful. And I'm saying that on behalf of the West Midlands Hazards Trust now, which I'm hoping might be able to be reinvigorated. But I also want to say, in terms of what has been discussed today, I initially put my name down to say something about the Workplace Race Equality Scheme, which I know something about. I did attend Roger Klein's talk in Birmingham. Those of you who can remember Roger Klein from the Trade Union Resource Centre or University and College Union will know who he is, and it's something that I think that scheme needs to be highlighted and continued as a culture change thing. But at the same time as all those things that are going on in the background are all the challenges of the moment, and I think there's never been a better time for us to be raising these issues and look into how we can challenge things and take forward campaigns. So I think we need to take up, you know, Naeem in the chat has said, you know, let's get some of what these issues are today and actually put them together into something and get them out there. I'm certainly willing to help with things like that. I've got to learn how to be a host for the Zoom meetings for something that I'm involved with in the asbestos campaign group, and I think we can produce things that both look at the issues that were ongoing before and link them up with the questions that are being raised at the moment, and finish up with what we can do in terms of the campaigns that are already ongoing and that can be raised. Everyone that we produce should come up with something like that. I think the only difficulty will be how to prioritise where to begin, because there is so much, whether it's NHS, social care, education, climate change. But I think we now have the wherewithal to be able to look at doing things a little bit differently from before. I support everything that Mary Wilkins said and everything that Richard Hatcher said, and you know, everything that's been said in terms of how we can actually raise the issues. It's just a case of us deciding on the executive what the priorities are and how we're going to go about it in a practical way with the facilities we have at our disposal. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. We are now running out of time. Yes, and we have two questions from people who so far indicated, but I'll take no more questions. Well, John O. John O.
Yes.
If you want to make a very quick statement,
Yes,
please.
it will be quick. Can you hear me all?
Yep.
Yep.
Okay.
Right, back to the
Please,
first
please.
speaker. My next door neighbour went to the Queen Elizabeth Hospital last year, NHS, was diagnosed with needing a heart bypass. It was booked for October last year, cancelled. Then rebooked for December last year, cancelled. And rebooked for March this year, obviously cancelled. He had a phone call from the NHS, Queen Elizabeth, last Thursday, saying that it would likely be another 6 months before they could even get round to scheduling it. Therefore, they were referring to the private hospital for them to do the bypass. And they referred him to the Priory Hospital, which in Edgbaston is only a mile away from the Queen Elizabeth. He had a phone call from them yesterday, and they said they will do the operation next Wednesday, which is the 6th of May. Now, the thing about this is that it is not highly unlikely that the surgeon who will be operating on him next Wednesday would be the same surgeon who would operate him in the NHS hospital. A lot of these private companies do not hire full-time staff. They just, when they need someone, they hire someone who's working for the NHS, and it should be stopped.
Okay. Thanking John for his contribution. We now have 2 questions. One for the first one, Elio, please. Elio?
Everyone, yes. I just wanted to go back to the issue that we discussed earlier of adult social care. I'm just wondering what it is that we can do to try and reverse this decision by Birmingham City Council to relieve itself of this responsibility for adult and social care. I'm wondering specifically if the Trades Council might be able to launch a petition accompanied by an open letter or a public statement about it.
Yeah. 9?
Ian, can I come back on this?
Yes. 9?
Okay. I mean, I think I was going to make a very short statement anyway. I think basically what Richard and Patrick have said are something that we need to take on board. But we need to draw out a scheme of how we're going to do this. Because coming out of this coronavirus crisis, and as the shutdown finishes, I think we're going to face very severe challenges. First of all, we're going to be put again in a very unsafe environment with a lot of the employers. We need to look at that. Secondly, I think we've got to hold the local council accountable for what it does. And I think that should be our priority. And also then make sure that our MPs represent us on a national level. Also hold the government to accountable. Because if you've been looking at the press conferences, yesterday in particular, what the scientific officers were saying is that the PPP, which is the private-public partnership, is working very well in this crisis. So they are laying the grounds for actually privatizing more of our health services, more of our social services, and we need to start preparing for it now. And I don't think we are prepared yet.
Okay, thank you. Now, the final question will be Naeem himself.
Which is basically what I've just said, I think.
Oh, I know, I appreciate that. Yeah. Okay, yeah. No further questions have been indicated. We're now running over time. Do you want to make a quick reply, Richard? Richard, a quick reply. If you unmute yourself, bottom left-hand corner.
Richard?
Richard, unmute yourself.
Yeah, I'm working on it. Yeah, okay. Just because Elio asked a specific question, which is that the government announced recently that councils could stop doing certain support things for social care in order to free up money for the NHS. Talk about, you know, robbing Peter to pay Paul. That's what it is. Specifically, it says the councils don't need, for the time being, to carry out assessments of individuals and carers' needs, the provision of detailed care plans, or the duty to meet the needs of someone assessed as eligible support. And it says a bit more, but you get the idea. In other words, they're going to turn off the tap for support, getting support going for people needing social care. And Birmingham is one of the only 5 councils in the country that is implementing this. And so that raises 2 big questions. The first is is this a good decision? Answer, no. People who are needing social care shouldn't be having services cut in order to pay for the NHS. And in fact, it's quite possibly illegal. There's a big argument going on in local government circles and among disability groups about this decision. The second big issue is who made it? Apparently it was made by an officer of the City Council on the 12th of April. There hasn't been a word about it from Paulette Hamilton, the cabinet member who's allegedly responsible for social care, nor has there been a word about it from the Scrutiny Committee on social care. And the reason there's been nothing from the Scrutiny Committee is because they've been closed down. Scrutiny committees now are not meeting in the city. And to his credit, Rob Pocock, who is the chair of the Health and Social Care one, has publicly criticised the council for this decision. So we have two issues to raise there. We need to get this decision by the council reversed, and we also need this to open up the democratic decision making of the council again, because it's been...
Yeah, if you send it to us.
And I'll send it to, well, anybody who wants, but I'll send it to Ian and Naeem. And
yeah, I think most of the people here are on our email list, so they can go out to them.
Yeah, and Elio asked about it as well. He was particularly...
I think Elio is one of the delegates.
Sorry?
Elio is one of the delegates.
Yeah, but I mean, he asked a question on the chat thing about that very issue, I think.
May I ask a question?
Yeah, go ahead.
Really? I don't know whether Richard knows, or how would I find out just exactly what work council are carrying out with regards to construction that most people would consider to be non-essential works, like what's going on at Birmingham University at the moment.
Yeah. I don't know anything.